and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Cinco de Mayo. It is May 5th, Sunday evening, 2019. Tonight's topic, central banks are buying gold. What you need to know. It is Solid Gold Sunday with Smaulgld. Now, Sunday evenings are going to be a show where we talk only about gold. We leave the silver stories, the crypto stories, the news stories, the political stories behind just on Sunday night, and we focus solely on gold. Last night, we focused solely on silver, and it was Saturday Night Silver with Smaulgld. By the way, last night's charts that we showed in the program are now up on Smaulgld.com, just as tonight's charts will be shown tomorrow on Smaulgld.com. We've got a lot of charts to show you in this entire central banks are buying gold. What do you need to know about this? Now, let's get into the topic of the evening. We're hearing so many stories. Central banks are buying gold, and people are getting all excited. That is all I need to know. Because if central banks are buying gold, they know what is going on. And you're hearing central banks are buying gold hand over fist. Most gold since 1967, most gold since whatever. You're hearing all these stories. Everyone's getting excited. And it's not only the traditional gold pumpers, because they'll make a mountain out of a molehill all the time, but you're seeing the mainstream media also, Bloomberg, Reuters, and so on, making a big deal out of this when, well, I don't want to prejudge what it is, but I'm going to show you what we've got here in terms of what the central banks are doing. So let's take a look at what we've seen. So we see central banks are buying gold. They are ditching the dollar for gold. This is in Bloomberg. Now, these headlines, by the time we reach the end of this podcast, you realize how foolish they sound. We're going to talk about how much gold is being bought by central banks, which central banks are buying it, why they're buying it, where they get it from, and indeed, how much it's all worth. And then compare all of that to how much the central banks are buying versus the overall global gold demand and global supply. And we're going to compare it just in nominal dollar amounts, how much they're actually buying, and which central banks are indeed buying it. And you'll realize the following headlines I'm going to show you are going to seem quite ridiculous. Central banks are ditching the dollar for gold. This is definitely not true, because banks bought 145 tons of gold in the first quarter. This is the World Gold Council, and Council expects central bank demand to stay strong this year. Okay, well, we're going to see what that means. There's another headline here. Central bank buying fuels red hot gold demand. This is red hot gold demand, according to Reuters. So they've got some clickbait going on there too. Red hot gold demand. Here's another story. This is from the Telegraph. Soaring gold demand from central banks boosts gold market. Really? The gold market's being boosted? Well, we're going to see where the price has been since all of this central bank gold buying has been going on. It is the most since 1967. Forex Street. Central banks bought more gold in 2018 than any year since 1967. World Gold Council. Now, we've heard this little story before, back in 2013, because 2012 central bank buying was the most since 1964. Gold route for central banks buying most gold since 1964. And that was back in 2013. They were trumpeting that. Now, what has all of this meant for the price? Absolutely zero, nada, zilch. There you go. Last year, central bank gold buying has had no influence on the price. We are since June 2018, when the price was $13.20. We are now at $12.78, even though central banks are buying gold. And not only have central banks were buying gold in 2018, they are buying gold in the first quarter of 2019. They've had zero impact on the price, and you're going to see why, because the amounts that were bought were negligible. Not only were they negligible, most of it was purchased by two central banks, Russia and Kazakhstan. Here's your 2-year chart. You don't really see much of a difference. Back in June of 2017, we're about 1240. Now we're at about 1280. You do see that line that we failed to meet, which is getting over 1360, 1350 the last 2 years. And it's also the same for the past 5 years. Is the 5-year gold chart. You can see that is a tough nut to crack to get over that 1350 mark and stay there. A lot of people say once we get over 1360, 1375, then it may be off to the races, but it looks like that is a line that is so far been unable to have been breached. All right, let's now look. So we've seen the headlines, we've heard the hype. Your favorite pumper channels have probably told you about that, and Basel III, and COMEX default, or whatever story they tell you why gold is set to skyrocket and so on. The gold pumpers are no different than the silver pumpers or the crypto pumpers. They're always telling you something, but they're not giving you the context. Tonight we're going to give you the context. This is not to throw cold water on the story, but it really is not much of a story at all. So let's take a look at what the central banks are doing. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other stories within the gold sector that have an impact on price, have an impact on demand, have an impact on supply. It's just that this central bank story is a non-story, and I'm going to show you why. All right, so first off, here is from the World Gold Council what they're crowing about. They're saying that the central banks added 657 tons of gold in 2018. Now, I added up the numbers, and I don't get 657 tons, and I added them up from looking at central banks, their own websites, and then also at the World Gold Council data. And indeed, central banks did not buy 657 tons of gold last year. They say central banks and other institutions. I don't know what the other institutions are. I could not find a footnote that explained that. But in any event, the central banks did buy more gold, just by the way they calculate it. About 445 tons. I don't know what these other institutions are, but it doesn't matter. The difference between 500 tons and 700 tons is not really a big deal because it's not really a lot of gold. So, for example, 400 tons is about 12 million ounces. It's worth $16 billion. That's not a lot of money. Not when you're talking about central banks that are running massive finance and global trade. You're not talking about a lot of nominal dollars. And when we'll see, it's all concentrated in Russia. It really is not a lot at all. But in any event, you can see here that 657 tons, which is not just central banks. There's other institutions in there who are unnamed. But in 2013, there was 624. In 2012, it was 569. So you're not even talking about a massive increase off of those other recent highs. And most of it is because Russia, as we'll see, went from 220 or 30 to 270 tons a year. So let's take a look at central bank buying in 2018. Now, indeed, 34 countries did buy or sell gold in 2018. However, you can see the towering 273 tons from Russia. The second biggest buyer was Kazakhstan with 51 tons. India bought 42 tons. And then from there was a one-time purchase from Hungary. First time they bought since like 1914 or 1945 or something like that. 28 tons. Poland also bought for the first time 26 tons. Then you got Mongolia, Uzbekistan, and China bought 10 tons of gold at the end of the year. The rest of it is, you can see the yellow lines. If you can't see it on your screen, you can check tomorrow on Smaulgld.com. If you're listening on an iPhone, you're driving, or you're not looking at the screen. There are a lot of central banks that also sold small amounts of gold. Germany sells 3 or 4 ounces of gold, 3 or 4 tons of gold a year, and as have other countries on this chart. But net, it was a net 395 tons of gold that were bought by central banks. If you take away the countries that sold and you just say which countries bought, it was about 445 tons. Not the 600 and whatever tons they say there was, because they include, quote, other institutions. So central bank buying was a net 395 tons. And as I mentioned, 400 tons of gold is about 12.8 million ounces, which at today's prices is worth $16 billion. I don't know if you get excited about $16 billion in the global scheme of things. It really isn't a lot. And if you figure that the 273 tons of it, of the 395 that were net purchased, Russia accounts for 70% of it. So central banks are buying gold. No, Russia's buying a lot of gold, and there's a half a dozen other banks that are buying a little bit of gold, and it's not really amounting to much. Turkey sold gold last year. Now let's look at the first quarter. That buying has slowed down, other than from the normal suspects, Russia and Kazakhstan. Now China's back in the business. When I say China, these are all central banks. This is the People's Bank of China. They're now adding 9 to 11 tons a month for the past 4 months, or the first 4 months of 2019. This is just the first quarter. Kazakhstan 11 tons, Ecuador 10 tons, Colombia 6 tons, Uzbekistan, who added gold last year, has dropped 15 tons so far in the first quarter. Turkey added 7 tons, Qatar added 9 tons, Mongolia sold 3.4 tons. So if you add all this up, they're saying central banks have purchased 145 tons, but yet, if you net it out, because there were banks that sold, they bought 125 tons in the first quarter. You're talking about $5 billion worth of gold. All the mighty central banks in the world in the first quarter bought $5 billion worth of gold. And if they carry on at this torrid pace, they might buy $20 billion worth of gold. This is a non-event. It is not ditching the dollar. It's not dumping the dollar. It doesn't mean they know what is coming. They're preparing for a gold back this or that. No. We're going to get into why the big buyers, why they're buying and where they get their gold from. Now, let's just take central bank buying and put it in the context of overall gold demand. Now, the biggest driver of gold, I talk about this all the time, is jewelry. Last year, 2,241 tons of gold went to jewelry. That's more than half of overall gold demand. The second largest driver of gold demand is investment demand, i.e. non-central bank, other institutional gold demand. That is gold, rounds, bars, coins that goes into India, China, the United States, other countries in the world. People buying gold for investment purposes is at 1165 tons last year. Central banks and other institutions accounted for about 656 tons. Now remember, when central banks sell gold, that doesn't get included or deducted from what they bought. The World Gold Council adds up what they bought, but not what they sold, and presumably that whatever got sold ends up in some other demand bucket. Technology, people they underestimate the amount of gold used in technology and electronics. So it looks like about 10 million ounces go into electronics each and every year. Now, 240 million ounces of silver go into electronics, but still, that's a decent amount of gold. It is an important industrial metal. It's rare, it's expensive, but in some respects it is indispensable in many electronics, and certainly in space electronics because it doesn't corrode, rust, or so on. You can't use copper for that because you're not going to replace circuits at outer space once you send a satellite up there. All right, so you see here the big demand driver for gold in 2018 is jewelry, then investment, then central banks, and then technology. Central banks are not going to be a driver of overall gold demand or gold price, and here's why. They're not, first of all, if you look back to the chart here, so you went from 400 tons to 650 tons. A couple extra 100 tons a year is not really going to, quote, break the bank or cause a strain on supply. But here's a more important reason for that is who is buying. The banks that are buying are all major gold producers. So let's start with Russia. Russia is the third largest gold producer in the world, and they indeed are buying. No doubt about it. You can see here in this chart, they are buying each and every month. Now, why is Russia buying gold? Russia is clearly the biggest central bank buyer. They have a reason to buy gold, and they have a reason to de-dollarize. Why? They're under sanctions. They're supposed enemies of the United States and of the West. They do very little trade with the United States. The ruble is a crappy currency. It doesn't do well. And they have the third largest gold mining production in the world. Why wouldn't they buy their own gold and put it into the reserves? It's better than buying rubles, that's for sure. And if they're under sanctions with the dollar, what good is it to hold dollars if they can't use them in the SWIFT system? So adding gold to reserves makes a lot of sense. They've got gold in their backyard, and they are, in the last few years, increasingly taking that gold, you can see right here, and moving about 85 to 90% of their gold reserves into, their gold mining production into reserves. Now, if Russia is doing this, this is not straining the supply at all. Why? Because for the last 3 years, they're taking 80 to 90% of their mining production, and they're just putting it into their central bank. The rest of the world wasn't counting on having this gold anyway, so it stays in Russia. If Russia is the largest buyer, the largest central bank buyer, and they're the ones that everyone's getting excited about, even though they're claiming it's central banks, it's not. It's 70% Russia. And Russia is buying its gold. They're not straining the rest of the world for gold supplies in order to add these 271 tons or 273 tons like they added in 2018. They're just getting it from their own supply. So it's a very important point that when central banks are buying gold, yes, 70% of the central bank buying is Russia. And where does it come from? It comes from their own supply. They're getting high on their own supply. The second largest buyer last year. Kazakhstan, guess what they have? They have gold mining production, and it is on the increase. Kazakhstan also has a crappy currency called the Kazakh Tenge, Tenge. And so they also are adding gold. 53 out of 85 tons. Some say, I saw a thing today, it said they only have 70 tons. I forgot where I got these numbers. 70 tons of gold mining, but they added 53 of those tons into reserves in 2018. So, Kazakhstan, Russia, the two biggest ones, accounting for nearly 85% of all central bank gold buying in 2018, getting it from their own supply. Uzbekistan also is the eighth largest gold producing country. They also, if you remember, were on the chart, and they are buying from their own supply. So a lot of the central banks that are buying gold are in the top 10 of gold mining production. And with respect to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they are relative newcomers to gold mining production. They have very large proven gold reserves, but they've only in the last 10 years made an effort to pull the stuff out of the ground, and they are now adding it to reserves. Well, you can see here, this is gold versus the Kazakhstan Tenge, and horrible job that currency does of preserving value. Looks like gold since 2016 has gone up 2.5 times versus that currency. And as a result of their increasing gold production, Kazakhstan has been adding gold almost now every month for over 6 years. Every single month. You can see this is just going back to January 2015. They're adding even before then. And they add about 120 to 170,000 ounces each and every month. And again, this is not straining. This is new gold. This is gold, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, gold that otherwise wasn't being mined in the last 10 years is now being mined. You can see increasing amounts of gold being mined by Kazakhstan, and it just doesn't make it to the international market. They doubled their gold production in the last 6 years, and they've added most of that gold to the reserves. Central banks are buying gold. Why? Not because they know what is coming and they're preparing for a Kazakh-backed gold, whatever they have. No, they're buying it because they're minting it. They're mining it, and they're adding it to reserves, and it makes total sense. I'm not criticizing them for doing it. I think it makes total sense. If you have a bad currency and you essentially have a gold mine in your backyard, and in the case of Russia, you're under sanctions, why would you hold on to your reserves in dollars if you can hold on to them in gold if they're essentially worth, some might say, more than dollars? Although gold may be less liquid, but clearly gold over the last 20, 30 years has held its value versus a dollar, and in most instances actually increased. So it's a very smart move to have gold in your reserves, especially if you can. And I don't know the deals they get from their own mining companies, whether they get the gold at prices lower than market. So Russia, Kazakhstan. Now what about China? China is another country that also has massive gold reserves, and they don't have the greatest gold reserves, but they do have the #1 gold mining production in the world, over 400 tons a year. And here you can see the People's Bank of China. They held off. There's a lot of misinformation about China's lying and Sun Tzu deception and all this other nonsense about China. We're not talking about China, the country. We're talking about the People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of China. Just like when we talk about the Reserve Bank of India, we're not talking about all the gold in India. We're talking about the Central Bank of India. Same thing here. People's Bank of China added gold for a while, slowed down, stopped buying from 2016 at end of 2018, added 9-10 tons at the end of last year, and this year has been buying again every month, but only 9 to 11 tons a month. Again, not a lot. However, China, India, the country, not the central banks, that's where the major gold demand is, and those are the numbers to watch. Not that central banks are buying gold. Central banks are not buying that much gold. The big numbers to look at, if you're trying to figure out whether there's going to be surges in demand or that might influence the price, you have to look at consumer demand in India, jewelry demand in India, jewelry demand in China, investment demand in China, investment demand in India, investment demand around the world. Not central banks. The central bank is just a cliche. It's a headline. It really is just Russia and Kazakhstan and occasionally a couple of other banks. The overall numbers are relatively small. But here you can see China. Now, China is different than Kazakhstan and Russia and Uzbekistan in that those three countries basically buy anywhere between 60 and 90% of their own gold and no more. China not only mines over 400 tons of gold a year, but they import boatloads of it too. And most of it doesn't end up at the People's Bank of China. So it's important not to follow necessarily what the People's Bank of China lists or reports, but really what's the flow that we can. And we don't even know about gold that goes imported into China via ports other than Hong Kong. We only know Hong Kong and what leaves from Switzerland to Hong Kong, but we do not know how much gold, if any, and they probably do import gold through Shanghai and other ports. Same with India, but the numbers that they import are large, and the numbers that they mine are large, and that's what we know about. So, yes, it's clear there's lots of gold in China. It's just not on the People's Bank of China's balance sheet. Same with India. We know there's a lot of gold that flows in through the legal channels in India, but what we don't know is how much gold flows in through smuggling. Gold in India is subject to a 10% duty, import tax, and also a 5% jewelry tax. And we don't know how much of that gets avoided. So both China and India have prodigious gold appetites. But again, it's not the central bank. When people talk about, I saw one article saying that central bank buying was going to put a floor on gold demand. No, it's not. The largest gold buyers, central banks, would be last year among the three: Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. They're just buying newly minted, newly mined gold that wasn't generally on the market anyway. So what they're doing is not providing a floor. What provides a floor to the gold market is Indian imports, Chinese imports, Thai imports, Turkish imports. U.S. also has a significant gold demand in excess of the amount that it mines as well. I mentioned Turkey. Let me see if I just quickly show you Turkey. It's got nothing to do with central banks. They make decent amounts of gold imports. The country, not just the central bank. The central bank could be net sellers, but the people could be buyers. So you got to keep that distinction in mind whenever we talk about any of this. So, for example, the Reserve Bank of India, the Central Bank of India, didn't buy any gold for like the last 11 years. And just last year, they bought 40 tons of gold. However, India has imported 900 tons of gold a year. It just doesn't go to the central bank. It goes to the people. So here's a chart showing Russian central bank gold additions. Remember, Russia's the big dog, the one that is importing. Is adding the most gold to reserves. They're the poster child for central banks buying gold, but they get crushed by the amount of gold that India imports. Look at those numbers: 947 tons to 208, 900 tons to 224. 647, that's towards the end of last year. I think I've updated this chart. Let me give you a better chart. It's directionally correct, but I think that, this one's better. Here you go. These charts will be on Smaulgld.com. Any of the charts that have the Smaulgld on them, you can copy. You can do what you want with them. The others I get from Nick Laird. He's got his own copyright on those. Russian Central Bank gold reserves versus Indian gold imports. Here you can see 718 last year versus 272. So remember, keep in mind, Central Bank of Russia is the biggest and the baddest central bank. It's supposedly central banks buying gold. It's the big deal in the gold market. It's not. Take Russia out of it, and central banks are buying next to nothing. And Russia's 69% of the net gold purchases of central banks. The big numbers to look at are India imports, Chinese imports, Shanghai Gold Exchange, whatever the Gold Council, World Gold Council puts out on investment demand, jewelry demand, and they do put out some very good numbers, very significant numbers. It's interesting that they choose to highlight the central gold buying. I suppose it's because it does make great headlines. You find out people bought a lot of jewelry. It doesn't get people excited. They bought some extra gold for technology and electronics. Doesn't get people excited. But central banks are buying gold. That does seem to be a big story. Next week, we're going to talk about the mints. We're going to talk about the Perth Mint, the Canadian Mint, the U.S. Mint, and the gold that's sold there. But Russia versus China. Russia, the last few years, has been buying far more gold than the People's Bank of China. You can see that on the chart there. In 2015, in 1 year period from 2015 November to November 2016, Russia crushed China, 122 tons more gold. And then China, the People's Bank of China, stopped buying gold. And even though they've started buying gold again, Russia's still crushing them. You could see here, China's buying 9 to 11 tons of gold, 10 to 11 tons of gold. The last 4 months that they reported, December, January, February, and March of 2019. And Russia has been buying at a faster pace. And you can see just in those 4 months, Russia's bought about 19.9 more tons of gold than the People's Bank of China. So clearly, now China, the People's Bank of China getting back in is interesting because they did not add much in 2018. They only bought the last month. But it looks like, if China stays on this current pace, they'll add about 10 tons average a month. So they'll add 120 tons of gold. It's worth $4 billion. When you think about the size of the Chinese economy, the size of the global economy, China adding $4 billion worth of gold is not a big deal. But Russia, again, though, is the big one to watch. You can see that there. That one shows them buying over 200 tons of gold each and every month. Now, each and every year that chart shows. An important point to note, though, is this is the central bank's top 10. Now, the United States, we don't know about, but we can assume that the Treasury is not adding more gold. We know Germany isn't adding gold. They actually sell 3 or 4 tons a year to their own country. I think we're back. The United States, if you look at the top 10, they are not adding gold. We can assume that. Germany, they sell about 3 tons a year to the government so they can mint coins. IMF gold doesn't go anywhere, doesn't go up or down. Italy, France, they're not adding gold. In fact, they're not allowed to manage their own gold reserves unless they speak to Mario Draghi at the European Central Bank. France, nothing. Russia, we know, is adding. Central Bank of Russia. Central Bank of China, we know, is adding now. Switzerland sold over 1,000 tons of gold back in the early 2000s. They're down to 1040. Japan hasn't added any gold in a while. Netherlands hasn't added any, although they've repatriated it. And we've mentioned India's back to buying small amounts of gold. The real action is taking place, as I mentioned, in the gold producing nations. So look, you now have in the top 20 Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, solely on the strength, not that these are major economic powerhouses or even have massive foreign reserves. Kazakhstan only has 30 billion in foreign reserves, and about half of them are in gold. They have like 380 tons, and Uzbekistan has 360 tons. But look at that. Those little countries, when I say little, I don't mean geographically, countries with basically very little GDP, they have more gold than Saudi Arabia and United Kingdom. So I don't read much into this. It makes sense that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan will probably enter the top 10 in the next couple of years, simply on the fact that if they keep mining gold and figure it makes sense for them to boost the reserves that way, they'll keep adding it. And we'll probably see Russia and China move closer to Germany and surpass Italy and France. I don't know what it means, but all this gold, when even Russia's big hoard, 2,500, almost 2,500 tons of gold it's not 2,200 tons worth of gold. It's only worth $90 billion. Now, some people are saying, well, they could revalue it. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think that's why they are accumulating gold. And even if you raise, and it would be a huge thing. Remember when they confiscated gold in the United States in the 30s, they boosted the price from, what was it, $20.67 to $35. It was like a 67% increase. You're talking like for this to be a big deal, they'd have to boost the gold price 10x. That's ever going to happen, as Shrek would say. All right, so that is what's going on there. Let's see if we have anything else here. Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Turkey. We didn't look at Turkey. This is not the central bank, but this is just to point out that Turkey does import gold, and again, in amounts much larger than the central bank adds. You can see in 2017, 2018, many months importing 10, 20, 30, 40, up to 65 tons of gold. That's a lot of gold, but that's not going to the Turkish central bank or even the Turkish state-owned banks, all of that. A lot of that's going to the peoples of Turkey. And I think that's all I got to show you for tonight. Next week we'll do the mints, but let me just put back up here just to highlight what's going on. Central banks. When you talk about central banks buying gold in the first quarter, it's Russia, China, Kazakhstan are the big ones. If you're talking about who bought gold, which central banks bought gold last year, you're talking about Russia, Kazakhstan, India. And then Turkey and Hungary bought some, and that's it. I mean, this is a striking show that it is not central banks It is basically, if you take Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Russia, they have mines. So you have, of the net 395 tons of gold purchased, take Russia's 273, add that gold producing nation, add to Kazakhstan, gold producing nation, 51 tons, add to Uzbekistan, gold producing purchased. So we were just adding up. It looks like we're getting cut in and out here. If you take Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, and you add up the gold that they mine and add to reserves, you take Russia's 273 tons, Kazakhstan's 51 tons, and Uzbekistan's 19 tons, and you divide it by the 395 tons of gold net purchased by central banks, and it's 88% of the gold. So, to wrap up, who's buying? Central banks that have significant mining production. How much are they buying? A good portion of their own mine supply. Why are they buying? Because they can and they have it. Where they get it from? They get it from their own mines. And you take them out of the mix, and central banks are not buying gold. In fact, the big central banks aren't buying any gold. We had one-off purchases last year from Poland and Hungary. Uzbekistan actually sold gold in the first quarter of this year. All right, well, let's see what you guys are saying. I think it's more important to look at overall gold demand, overall jewelry demand, overall Indian imports, overall Chinese imports, than to be just parroting. Central banks are buying gold. That is all I need to know. Well, just take a look at this chart again. The big driver of gold is jewelry, then investment. And in some years, technology is about on par with central bank. Take Russia out of it, and more gold is used in electronics than is bought by central banks. Take Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan out, and central banks aren't buying. They're buying next to nothing. All right, let's see what y'all are thinking, saying, talking amongst yourself, whatever you're doing in the chat. And a reminder, if you're interested in purchasing gold or silver, precious metals, please consider doing so through the Smaulgld site. Remember, we don't have any of those YouTube ads on here. We're supported solely by your donations, which you can do via Bitcoin or Litecoin or by check. On the screen there, Smaulgld LLC, P.O. Box 714, Dover, New Hampshire, 03820. Or you can become a patron, or you can also join one of the mug clubs, Smaulgld mugs, on Subscribestar, or make a one-time or recurring payment on PayPal. And again, Bitcoin, Litecoin. But also, if you're interested in gold or silver and interested in buying gold or silver, you can do so through the affiliate links. SD Bullion, Money Metals Exchange, and Golden Eagle Coins. And if you buy through those links, Smaulgld gets a small commission, not investment advice, to buy gold or silver. But if you're going to do so, you pay no more, no less than if you visited those sites yourself directly. So again, the site is fully funded. Well, it's not fully funded. It's funded. It's not fully funded because I don't make money off of this after I pay for the fees and so on. But it is supported by your donations and by clicking on the affiliate links and making your purchases that way. So we don't have any AdSense or Google ads, which are annoying. All right, let's see what you guys are saying in the comments. And I hope we didn't get cut off too much. Let's see. Remember, if you want to comment and you want me to notice your comment, put SMAULGLD, and it'll be highlighted, and I'll be able to see your comment, and I'll be able to comment on it. Pablo says, Happy Cinco de Mayo. Cinco de Mayo. All right, Presente Girl is here. I haven't seen her in a while. Phil is here. Jack, Fiona. Oh, there's Anna. I was thinking she's not here, but there she is. All right, Seth is here as well. Noah. Fiona, Barry, Russia's only resources to save Russians and neighboring countries, not more. Okay. Where's Barry? Scott is here. All right, let's see. What else? Fiona Whalen, Smaulgld. I read in a Russian article in the last 3 years there's a huge dollar shortage in international trade. That's correct. no matter how much treasuries or direct dollar supply they dry up on a whim. Yeah, that's why all this dollar collapse stuff is a bunch of nonsense. It's gold pumper talk. Game over, game changer. They still pump this stuff. They still keep telling you it's set to skyrocket, gold silver ratio going down. And people insist on this stuff. I mean, you got a 10-year buying opportunity. They never give it up. They never change their point of view. They can't. I mean, if once you've become a silver or gold pumper or crypto pumper and your livelihood depends upon it, then you just got to keep pumping. All right. It's amazing how many people fall for it and continue to parrot this stuff. Central banks are buying gold. That is all I need to know. That's a good thing. With central banks, they're buying gold. That's a good thing. All right. Basel III, all this stuff here. Let's see. Smaulgld. What are the jewelry outflows like from India? They do actually export. It's not like China where they keep everything in the country. Indian jewelers are supposedly quite skilled, so they do export a decent amount. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a lot of jewelry gold demand and plenty of gold imports, but they do export some. What else do we have? Philip Quinn. Fiona, the kids are not even interested in owning Smaulgld mugs. No, Philip. Everyone's interested in Smaulgld mugs. What are you talking about? See, I don't have the context here. I think you're probably talking about how millennials do not have tactile items and they live in a digital world. We're going to have to make Smaulgld digital mugs then. I don't know what else to say. All right. Lewis is the talk of the China trade deals going south. Just more dog and pony shows. Ask Chuck the plot. No, actually, it's a complex question because tariffs in general are harmful, or they redistribute who gets harmed. They're not win-win. They're generally someone wins and someone loses. But the way the Chinese imbalance with the U.S. has been is obviously China imports a lot of stuff and the United States was getting it for cheap. And then the trade-off there was the U.S., paid dollars for that. And some people were happy with that, but the trade-off there is that the Americans don't make this stuff. The labor costs are cheaper in China, and that drives labor costs, makes it hard for Americans to compete. But putting all that aside, I actually think if the goal is to rebalance the trade between the two countries, obviously slapping those tariffs on, whether they help or hurt the U.S. economy is a different story. They're going to hurt on making the price of goods higher, but then they'll help on creating more high-paying jobs, manufacturing jobs in the U.S. But putting that aside is actually think that it's working to the extent that the Chinese have a lot to lose in this trade war because they're counting on their productive capacity being exported, meaning they want to make stuff and sell it for cheap to the United States. And if the United States says, well, we're not going to take as much because we're going to put tariffs on it, that forces China to either have to make the prices even cheaper, which they can. They can say, okay, well, if the tariffs are going to be 25%, we're going to tell the state-owned companies to lower the prices. We'll give them tax breaks. We'll lend them more money or do something. So I actually think it's not a lot of people, they keep getting snarky like there's never going to be a deal. No, there'll be a deal. Both China and the United States have unique negotiating positions and strategies. But both countries know that they need a deal. And I think China realizes they need a deal. They also need to save face. And there's a lot going on there. I think there will be a deal eventually. And it'll probably be more balanced. And it may lead to more trade, which would be good. But it's hard to tell what's going on because we don't really have access. You can't trust the media to tell you what's going on. And I have no idea what's going on there, nor does anyone else, unless they're actually involved in the negotiations. Let's see. Digital mugs. Yes, that's what we got to have, Ann. Fiona Whalem. Smaller. The bottom line, it might be 10 years from now. Nothing from those assets we consider wealth protection will any considerable value as new generations don't value these assets. That's right. When people say gold is money, period, silver's been money for 5,000 years, that doesn't mean anything to me. You're denying history. Well, horses were transportation for 5,000 years. End of story. Period. They'll always be transportation. They're not. Now, I'm not predicting that gold and silver won't be valuable 10 years from now. But I can't insist that because they have been, when they say, oh, gold always does an accounting, and when this happens, and gold's, well, no, not necessarily. When the collapse and the reset, and they just assume, first of all, they assume there's going to be a reset. They assume that when it does happen, that people are going to clamor for gold. Who's going to clamor for gold? The same people that want chocolate bars instead of gold when Mark Dice is trying to hand them out, they're not going to clamor for gold in the monetary system. The people that are currently in the monetary system, they don't want gold or they'd already have it. All right. Bingo. Fiona says, when people ask me how to protect your wealth against government mischief, I always say you can if government wants to rid you of your wealth. They will. Yes. And a lot of people, they also, I think it's somewhat moronic when they say, well, if the lights go out, your Bitcoin is worthless. Okay, what if the lights don't go out? I didn't think of that. So basically, if everything you do is on the basis if the lights go out, how are you hedged against the lights not going out? Which means you can't put all your eggs in the basket depending on disaster. Because if disaster doesn't happen, then you're living in a disaster because your disaster assets, like silver, have gone down 60-70%. They're not serving any disaster function. And who even knows that if there is a disaster, that people are going to accept? The longer you go between disasters, where people have any memory of even using silver coins, who's to say that those Roosevelt dimes that we talked about the other night, we think they might be useful for barter, but maybe people look and say, what do I want with this? This is not of any value to me. I don't know. We don't know. You can't insist that the way the world was is the way the world's going to be. And that's why I think listening to these channels who insist mathematical certainty, they tell you, I guess, what they want you to hear. And then once you get used to hearing it, that's what you want to hear. And then you just you get a steady drip of that, and you go to 12, 15 other channels and listen to the same other nonsense. All right. Let's see what else we got. Got anything else? Wall Street for Mainstream is on. All right. Well, I think we're done here, though. I'm not deferring to Wall Street for Main Street. If you want to go over there and listen to that, go ahead. But, no, we are done. So, I want to thank you for joining me tonight, and we will see you tomorrow night. Tomorrow is Monday. We start a new week, and thank you very much for joining me. And I'll give you the 10-second countdown in case you want to ask one final question, and we'll introduce Bernie. Okay, so we're going to do 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1%, 0. Have a good night, and that's a good thing.